So, for a bit of context, this was right back after 9/11 had just happened. I, female and 24 years old, was driving by myself across country to get to my son who was with my ex. I had been out of state at the time taking care of a sick family member. It was in the middle of night in New Mexico when I suddenly saw police lights appear behind me. I was exhausted and quite annoyed. I hadn't been speeding or anything like that, and I didn't think I had any broken lights either. There also weren't really any other cars on the road at that time. I was close to the exit for my hotel that I had planned to stop at for the night. I pulled over to the side and the cop walked over to my driver's side window. This in itself was pretty weird. Usually they would come over to the passenger side window on roads like highways, just in case a car came by or something. I gave him all of my registration, license, things like that, but instead of looking it over, he just stared at me for the longest time. It was so awkward. He walked over to his car, but then returned almost immediately without even bothering to check anything. He told me to step outside of the car. Okay, so now I was worried at this point. I had gotten tickets before, but being asked to step outside of the car was not something I'd ever experienced. I immediately did as he said, and he asked me if I had been drinking. I said I hadn't, and then I asked why he'd pulled me over in the first place. He told me he'd seen me driving erratically, which was obviously not true. Then he asked me if I was a terrorist, which was even more absurd. I was a young American white woman just driving, so there was really no reason for him to be asking this question out of nowhere. It was weird, and I also had a veteran's ID too. He gave me a walk-the-line drunk driving test, which I passed easily, obviously. Then he began to tell me he needed to search my car to see if I had any drugs on my person. I thought about this for a minute because I knew my rights and all, but it was already so late, and I was tired. I just didn't want to deal with all the BS of refusing, so I gave him the okay. Besides, I knew I didn't have anything like that in my car. When he got to my truck, he opened up a small suitcase I had that was my dancer's, stripper stuff. He asked about it, and I told him I stripped for a living. This really set him off all of a sudden, and he started screaming and berating me for being a trash person. This pissed me off. I started looking around at my situation. I was completely alone for the most part, with this weird guy. Every once in a while a car would pass by, but for the most part the road was completely empty. It was the middle of the night. I didn't have anything on myself to protect me, and he had a gun. He told me I needed to walk back into the tree line that was next to the road. I stared at him and immediately said no. I demanded he call for backup instead and other officers come to sit with us. He was thrown off by this. I said I wanted a female officer and I would no longer comply with anything he said from then on. Then I tried to start waving down cars as they passed by. The man began to panic and told me to calm down. He wrote out a speeding ticket and let me go. I never paid that ticket, but I also never heard another word about it, and this was 20 years ago. At the time, I was really shaken. I just forgot about it. But looking back, I'm pretty sure that person was not actually a real cop. This happened about 5 years ago, after my fiance and I had been living in our house for a little bit over a year. I'm 6 foot tall and about 225 pounds or so. I've always been naturally muscular, and I've also been told I have a very intimidating demeanor. My fiance is all of 5'2" and weighs maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. A tiny little thing to be sure. Our house is a bi-level home where you walk in the front door and there are 2 half staircases going up to the living room or down to the basement. The only access to our backyard is through the sliding glass door in the upstairs living room and down the stairs from our deck. This is important. Now, to let you know beforehand, during this time I partied quite a lot. Way more than I should have, actually. I was between jobs and it was toward the end of the holidays, so my interest in finding a new one wasn't quite what it should have been. Many of these nights I was out partying, I would end up crashing with friends, which meant my fiancé spent many a night alone with our 3 dogs. I had a very serious problem with substance abuse at the time, primarily alcohol. I'm sad to say I was letting it get the better of me. Fast forward a couple of months. I had just found a new job that had random drug and alcohol tests. A godsend in hindsight, honestly. I had been sober all of 2 days and had begun repairing my relationship with my fiancée when she told me how she was glad that I was sleeping at home again. I thought nothing of this at first and kissed her on the head. I told her I was too and that I loved her more than anything in the whole world. Later that night, my fiancé and I were watching TV downstairs when I thought I heard something moving around in our backyard. The dogs apparently heard it too, but I dismissed it because they just perked up their ears but didn't seem to be too alarmed. A moment later though, I heard the noise once again. My fiancée very quickly muted the TV and gave me a very nervous look. "Did you hear that?" she asked, looking very uncomfortable. I told her it was probably just a few neighborhood cats playing in our bushes, as there were quite a few outdoor cats living in the area, but she shook her head and insisted this could not be the case. Before I could even ask her what made her so sure, I heard our sliding glass door upstairs fly open. All 3 of my Great Danes and myself jumped to our feet in an instant. The dogs let out the most ferocious sounding barks I've ever heard and tore ass upstairs with me right behind them. As I'm rounding the very first set of stairs and the dogs are reaching the top of the second set, I see the sliding glass door slam closed and the silhouette of a man running away. I get to the door and fling it open. The dogs shove me out of the way to chase after this would-be intruder. I grab my flashlight as well, one of those big 4D cell mag lights that cops carry around, and sprinted into the yard. I had just barely made it down the deck stairs when I saw the dogs freaking out at the back fence. I sprinted over and jumped the fence just in time to see the man reaching the opposite fence and trying to climb over it. He was covered head to toe in black clothing, a thick black hoodie with the hood pulled tight to conceal his face, and jet black cargo pants. Without any regard for my personal safety really, I charged the man and just barely missed grabbing hold of him as he climbed over the top of the fence. Once more I followed him over and came around the front of my neighbor's house, just in time to see him hop into a beaten old pickup and speed off in a hurry. I watched for a moment as he tore out of the neighborhood at 90 miles per hour and disappeared into the night. I ran back home as fast as I could to check on my fiancée and make sure she was okay. When I walked into the house, she was sitting in the upstairs living room, surrounded by all 3 of our Great Danes and clutching the biggest knife we own. She was very visibly shaken, but ultimately she's a very strong woman at heart and told me she was ready in case I got into trouble. After calling the cops, giving statements, and triple-checking to make sure every door and window in the house was locked up tight, we decided to watch another movie, as neither of us were particularly tired after the adrenaline rush we had just been through. During the movie, I asked her what made her so sure before it wasn't just cats playing around in the yard. What she told me was enough for me to decide it was time to change my whole life around. She said that for about a month now, while I had been away partying, she had been hearing strange noises coming from all around the house very late at night. She would hear what sounded like footsteps outside, and occasionally what sounded like hushed whispering. When I asked her why she never told anyone, she just shook her head and said she didn't really know. After hearing all of this, I came to the sudden realization that whoever this man was, he knew that I was never home at night, and my fiancée essentially was all alone most of the time. Fortunately for us though, he somehow missed the fact that we have 3 Great Danes, and for whatever reason, on this particular night, he decided not to check before making his move and make sure she was alone again. Since that day, I've been 100% sober from everything, 5 years total as of March 1st. And I've never left my fiancé alone overnight since. Our relationship has never been stronger, and our 3 Great Danes are 3 of the best dogs anyone could ever ask for. In the end, this experience changed my life completely for the better, so I guess I have to thank that creepy wannabe burglar, but I hope I never meet them again, for for their sake. Yesterday, Saturday morning, my kid, who's 2 years old, had been running out the back door and having us chase her for a while. It was a naughty habit and could be quite scary sometimes when she just bolted out of the door with no warning. She did that again this day, and I ran out after her, saying, "Wait for mommy!" She had just gone down the deck stairs a bit. I was right there behind her, when blam, blam! Gunshots, and a man running right in front of us through the alley behind my house with a small silver handgun pointed down the alley behind him. He was in a black pleather jacket and green hoodie, scarcely older than a teenager. He had this determined, unflappable air to him, though, that sent chills down my spine. I can't even begin to describe it. He was so close to us, there wasn't time to do anything more than grab my child and duck behind the chicken coop. City hens were allowed here. I guess I figured he'd keep running down the alley to escape, and we could just crouch there until he disappeared. Only, that's not what he did. He hung a hard left and jumped my neighbor's fence, the neighbor whose yard borders my chicken enclosure. This guy walked within feet of us. He started to exit by the neighbor's gate. Then, and this moment will stay with me for eternity, he hears my toddler scream crying, the only sound around in that moment. He stops with his hand on the gun and turns to look for the source of the crying. I couldn't hide any more than I already was, and if he turned his head just an inch more, he would instantly see us. Somehow in that moment, I managed to squeeze and lean just enough out of sight that he just barely didn't see us. There was something in his very calm energy that petrified me. A shooter who had just had a gun battle in the middle of the day in a little family neighborhood seemed to give no fucks naturally if others were hurt. I had this horrible cold dread wash over me in that moment. If he turned all the way and saw us, saw me, saw my expression, he would have to shoot me because I knew my face was saying, "I saw what you did." It was the most terrifying moment of my entire life. I felt perched between utter peril and life, the breathing, screaming life in my arms. Would he turn that little gun on us in that moment? Somehow, incredibly, miraculously, and amazingly, as though the pull of investigating the crying so close by him was suddenly overwhelmed by his desire to get the fuck out of Dodge, he put his gun into his pocket and exited through the gate, sprinting across the street. He jumped across the street neighbor's fence and disappeared. I smacked my kid's head in my haste to get us back inside, and freaking out, I pulled all the curtains and locked the doors tight. Then I spent the next 10 goddamn minutes getting put on hold by 911. When the cops arrived, I gave them my eyewitness account, and my neighbor who had been about to take her trash out and saw it all gave the same eyewitness account. They caught the guy he was shooting at, but they never caught the shooter I actually saw. It still sends chills down my spine. What if he came back? What if those bullets had struck my toddler, running down towards the shooter? A little girl was recently killed in the exact same way at a park we frequent, sprayed with bullets from a gun battle in the middle of the day, in the middle of a playground. It makes me sick to my stomach, and I'm not even sure I want to live in this city or this country anymore. So, a few years back during my senior year of high school, my stepdad made a very poor decision. His decision has caused a lot of pain and suffering for my mom and I, and we're both still in counseling for PTSD and anxiety disorders. Just for a little bit of context, my parents got divorced when I was 7 years old. Also, I'm a female if that matters to anyone. I was used to them each dating other people, and I was actually very happy for my mom when she told me she'd met somebody new. That was until I actually met him. As soon as I met this guy who we'll call Don, I immediately got a horrible feeling in my gut. Don was originally from Florida, and he moved to Kentucky right before he met my mom, leaving behind his ex-wife and son. A bit of a red flag. He was just a weirdo in every single sense of the word. He would always try and start an argument over petty topics or walk around shirtless with his strange nipple rings out while my friends were over. Although he was weird though, he was never really threatening or abusive at all towards either of us. That is, until one night right before my mom's birthday. I remember that night very clearly. It was my best friend's birthday and I was waiting for her to come pick me up to go to dinner. My mom and Dawn also had plans to go out that night and watch the UK-Florida basketball game. As an only child, my mom has always been very protective over me, so she wanted to wait until I left with my friend before she left with Dawn. This, for whatever reason, really pissed Dawn off and he stormed out of the house without her. I left very shortly after. I returned around 4 or 5 hours later. The game had been over for quite some time now, and Dawn still had not come home yet. My mom was acting very weird and nervous when I asked about him though, and just ushered me off to go to sleep. As I was sleeping, I was woken up by my mom screaming my name. Obviously disoriented, I groped around for my phone, thinking I must have overslept and was now late for school. When I checked the time though, it was near midnight. My mom screamed my name again and told me to shut my door and call 911. This was pretty much when the shit hit the fan. I started freaking out and jumped up to slam my door closed and lock it. Right in the moment I did this, 3 gunshots flew through my bedroom door, just narrowly missing me. I grabbed my phone and jumped to the other side of my bed. I laid flat on the ground, hoping to avoid any more bullets coming my way. I barely even had time to get out my address and inform them that someone was trying to kill me before I heard my mom scream one last time before 2 more gunshots rang out. Everything suddenly fell silent. I had the most horrible feeling that someone had just killed my mom and I'd heard it. I got up from the floor when I heard the person begin to throw themselves against my door in an attempt to break in. All that was running through my mind was getting to my mom and staying alive. Eventually though, he broke my door down. I was horrified to see my stepdad standing there. His eyes were glazed over as he grabbed me by my shirt collar and put the barrel of the gun to my head. I screamed and fought as he said over and over, "Is this what you wanted?" At this point, a lot of the details get hazy. I had a ridiculous amount of adrenaline pumping through me, but I somehow managed to back him up and shove him down onto my bed. I used both of my hands to grab hold of his with the gun and push it away from me. I tried with all my might to get it up against his head so I could blow his brains out. We struggled like this for a while until my mom came inside, gunshot wound to the neck and stomach. She laid her body across the gun while telling me to run. I hysterically ran out my front door and up the street to my neighbor's house. I scared them half to death, but I was able to redial 911 and explain exactly what was happening. As I was over at my neighbor's, my mom was still in my room with my stepdad. She says this was when she became very weak from blood loss and rolled off of him onto the ground. She begged him and asked why he was doing this, and in answer, he simply put his gun up to his mouth. She took this opportunity to run out the front door, right into the arms of a police officer. In the end, the police ended up having a standoff with Don as he barricaded himself inside. He made the mistake of pointing a gun at them though, and they blew his dick off and then arrested him. He's currently serving 45 years in prison, and to this day he'll give no reason as to why he suddenly decided to do this to us. In all honesty though, I don't care. My mom and I lived through it and have grown closer because of it. We actually got matching tattoos, reading "Strength comes from the madness we survive." And Dawn, I really hope everyone in prison enjoys you and your now half penis. This was back in 2015, when I was just 16 years old. I'm a man, by the way. This was in summer, where both my parents went to visit some of the relatives out of town. They wouldn't be home for 3 or so days. I was the only child, and I was the only one left in the house. My grandma did visit me every single day to make me lunch. They didn't ask that, mind you, since I did know how to cook at the time, but nobody could stop my grandma when she wanted to do something. Of course, she wouldn't stay over during the night though. That's when I would go wild, watching movies, gaming, watching YouTube, eating whatever I wanted, everything you could picture a 16-year-old doing when his parents aren't there to watch him. So the second night I was watching a movie and ran out of chips. I paused the movie and went down to the kitchen to grab some more. All of a sudden though, I could hear a window shattering and the door opening right up. The kitchen was separate from the living room where the door was being opened. I grabbed a knife and slowly peeked my head around the corner. I could see there a man around 2 meters tall. He had a baseball cap on, some old jacket, probably leather, and it was torn all on the right sleeve. My phone was locked up in the room upstairs. From the kitchen door, the stairs were directly to its right, so in my dumbass mind, I was thinking I could sneak past him and lock myself in. He immediately started going through the shelf right next to the door, very loudly, I must say as well. Somehow, I managed to solid snake sneak my way up the stairs. He turned around though and realized I was there. Out of fear in that moment, I screamed and threw my knife at him. I missed him, but hit the wall beside his head. The knife stuck in there tight. I guess he got scared by that and my savage screaming. He ran out, throwing things from the shelf at me before I could grab my knife once more. When I saw he'd left, I ran to my room and called the cops. They came quickly and took some fingerprints and any DNA samples they could find. The next morning, I called my parents. They came back around noontime. I don't know why, but I kept the knife lodged in the wall next to the door, maybe as a bit of pride in how I'd reacted so quickly in that moment. Of course, the first question they asked when they got home is why there was a knife protruding from the wall. We changed the front door to a more heavy-duty one that wasn't so easily opened. They arrested the guy within the very same week. One of the cops actually told me the guy thought I was going to kill him and had tried to call the police on me for an attempted murder. I guess the moral of the story is to just hide when someone's robbing your house. Either that or learn how to act like a crazy maniac, I guess. Long-time lurker, personally hoping I would never have a story to share of my own. Unfortunately, 2 weeks ago this started. In hindsight, I guess it started a long time ago actually. My now husband and I moved in together almost 4 years ago to a rather nice, albeit expensive apartment complex in a sort of nice part of town. We're on the 3rd floor with a large balcony that looks out onto the courtyard in which the other apartments in the complex are located. Basically, you can see all the other balconies and living rooms of the other tenants, and the open stairwells as well. For about a year or so, everything went by without a hitch. My husband works at a bar, so he would come home late at night. Usually, I would make it home at around 5 or so. It was easy to get to any apartment doorway, as the complex was large and open, with no security doors except the door to the apartment. This started in August of 2016. I would be home after work chilling and watching TV, almost always around 9:30 p.m., when I would hear someone come up the stairs. Things would get quiet all of a sudden, and then there would be loud, sharp knocks on my door. I didn't move because it was startling, but eventually I went to look at the peephole. I could see there stood 3 people with all black hoodies on, all seemingly staring into the peephole like they could see me. I didn't answer the door, of course, and after a while they just left. Cue to a few weeks later, the same time, but in this incident, footsteps and then loud, hard bangs on the door, so loud they sent my cat flying to hide. I sat there frozen. I said to myself, maybe it's the police or something. I went over to the peephole once again. This time, there was only one person. Dark hoodie, male, white, and very, very gaunt, with these huge black eyes. Again, I did not answer the door. Instead, I grabbed a kitchen knife that I kept by my side until my husband eventually arrived home. This continued on for weeks, and once when my husband was home as well. He proceeded to look out the peephole, saw those very same people and screamed for them to leave. They did as soon as they heard him. We called maintenance and the police, who both stated they would do regular patrols, but nothing else other than that. They also suggested we install cameras. After we did, everything stopped for a while, maybe 6 months or so during the winter. This helped me be at ease because when all of this was happening, I was having a very hard time sleeping, and I stopped going out at night as well. However, I assumed the same man started up again. This time, the same large bangs on the door would happen, but instead, when I would look out the peephole to see, no one would be there. I became horrified as I started to notice extinguished cigarette butts by the side of my door, like someone had been standing there and waiting. Again, we reported it. Security stepped up in the area, but I still did not feel safe. I was hoping it would all just stop, as I now felt tortured in my own home. I realized 2 weeks ago, though, that things could be much worse. At night, to go to bed, I would have to cross our eating area, which was right in front of our giant sliding glass door that led out onto our balcony. It was late at night. All the lights were off in the apartment. As I was walking by, I just happened to glance over. Across the courtyard, standing there, I could see the exact same man standing on the landing of the stairs across the way, from the 3rd to 2nd floor, staring right into my balcony. He was just standing there, completely unmoved and facing my direction. The same man who had been at my door. I went numb. My heart was racing. I was chilled to the bone. I knew logically he couldn't possibly see me because the lights were off, the stairway had no lights of its own, and it was so far away. But needless to say, I was scared shitless. I called my husband, who rushed over, but by the time he got there, the man had long since left. Cue more reports to the front office, more promised security patrols. This same creepy dead-eyed man in the black hoodie continued to stand at the stairway landing though, staring at my apartment. Every Friday for 2 weeks now. I'm horrified, and I've been having awful nightmares about someone breaking in and strangling me in my sleep. So, it's been a couple years since this happened, but it still bothers me to this day. I was in college and I lived in a house with 5 roommates. I lived on the 2nd floor. The way it was set up is kind of important. There were 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor and 2 bathrooms. 2 of the bedrooms each shared a bathroom, which was accessible only by the bedrooms and not the hall. This meant I could walk through the bathroom into my roommate's room and vice versa. My door had both a handle lock and a deadbolt, which I used every single night. It had been a habit I'd developed since freshman year, because in dorms, drunk roommates or floor mates tend to just wander in and wreak havoc if you don't. The door to the bathroom, however, did not have a lock, so I could never secure that room. One of my roommates had her boyfriend visiting, and he'd brought a friend along with him. Now, I hadn't spoken to the friend or gotten to know him at all. I didn't really have any opportunities to, since I didn't hang out in any of the common areas of the house. Frequently, I didn't even sleep there because I was casually seeing someone at the time. My first interaction with him was about 2 days into his visit. I was coming home around 6 a.m. from the house of the guy I was seeing when I walked into the living room. When I walked in, the visitor was alone and shirtless in my kitchen, which was open to the living room. He didn't even bother to say hello. He just angrily asked me, "Where were you?" I was taken aback. He sounded like a jealous boyfriend, but I told him I had been at my actual boyfriend's house. Immediately, he said, "You didn't tell me you had a boyfriend." Well, of course I hadn't told him. I had never actually spoken to him or really even seen him. I made a weird face at him and just went upstairs. I didn't see him again for the rest of the day. I slept in my own room that same night, deadbolt firmly secure. I woke up at around 7 the next morning, though, to him entering my room from the bathroom. Before I could even say anything, he saw that he'd woken me up. "Sorry I wandered into your room, I was just looking for the bathroom." "Well, you were just standing in it, so..." Immediately he retreated and closed the door tight. I didn't think much of it at the time because I was so groggy. I just fell back asleep instead. Now, despite all of this, up until this point, he hadn't really had an opportunity to do anything truly creepy. He just seemed kind of weird. Later that day, though, is when it got a lot worse. I came home from my classes and went up to my room. He followed me and let himself in without even knocking. The door had been firmly closed as well. I made it clear this was not okay. He said he was just being friendly though. We chatted normally for a couple of minutes because I didn't want to be rude to my flatmate's guest. Then though, he decided to say this. You know, I think you're the one. The moment I saw you, I knew it was you, and you're going to marry me. Obviously, I was taken aback by this, as this was only our third interaction ever. We'd spoken for a grand total of 2 minutes. Obviously, I had no interest in marrying this man. I wasn't even attracted to him. I told him to leave me alone now. I decided to leave and called the guy I was seeing. I told him what was going on, and he told me I could stay over at his house until this weirdo finally left. Well, since then, a couple of days go by. The weirdo was supposed to have left for good, so I went back to my house expecting everything to be fine. I slept in my room that night with the door locked as usual. Only, I woke up to hear someone trying to come in through my main door. I thought it must have been one of my roommates. Only a few seconds later, I hear the bathroom door slowly open and someone creeps into my room. I rolled over, only to see him standing a foot away from my bed looking over me. Hey there, beautiful. Where you been? Weren't you supposed to leave? Why the fuck are you in my room right now? Well, you know, I was supposed to, but I wanted to wait for you to come home. I just couldn't leave without saying goodbye, you know? He tried to climb into my bed with me and started to grab me while saying, "Scoot over. I want to say goodbye properly." I started screaming, "Get the fuck out of my room. I didn't invite you in. Leave now." I smacked his hands away from me. He got upset, but luckily he left without much more of a fight. Immediately, I left my house and went to my boyfriend's. The guy did finally leave later that morning. Afterward, I told my friend what her guest had done. You know what she said? "Well, you must have let him on then." Of course, this prompted me to ask her how I could have possibly let him on if I'd never even had a conversation with him. Of course, she proceeded to blame all his actions on me and tell me I should have been flattered and given him a chance. I just walked away from her at that point and never talked to her again after that year, and haven't since that day. The next day, despite me yelling profanities at him and telling me how creepy he was when I'd last seen him in my bedroom, the guy stalked me on all of my social media and tried to add me. Nope, blocked right away. To get this started, to some it may not sound the most scary, but having a stranger press up against you and block you from leaving is horrifying, especially when young. Normally, I try to cover for my mother, but as I've grown older, I've started to kind of blame her a bit, especially after the things she said. She just loves to invalidate her oldest daughter. I'd say I was around 8 years old at the time this took place. At the time, we had to get mail from the post office in town, and so, seeing my mom get the mail, my brain decided, wow, I want to be cool and get the mail just like my mom. That childish need to prove that I was mature. Eventually, after some time and a lot of begging, my mom let me go to get the mail. On to the actual story. I'd guess it was a weekend, as the post office was actually closed. You could still grab the mail though, just no people that worked there were there that day. I asked my mom if I could grab it myself as we slowly pulled up outside the post office. She nodded and handed me the keys that had the mail key on them, as well as a few others. Very loud and jingly keys. I jumped out of our old van and ran up the ramp to the building, avoiding the stairs altogether. I opened the door and could see a lady and a man getting their mail as well. Turning to the side, I also saw an older man sitting in the corner, staring at me. He gave me weird vibes even as a kid. but I still gave him a quick smile and wave. Bad move though. The man smiled back, revealing his stained teeth. I walked past him and went to the mailbox. Me being me though, I had forgotten what key was actually the appropriate one. I began fumbling awkwardly as the others grabbing mail left the building. After maybe 3 to 5 minutes of trying and failing, I finally unlocked it on my own. I was so happy that I disregarded the man staring as I grabbed up the mail inside. With a quick click of the lock, I closed the box and began to walk away. I found the gaze of the man though, as he looked at me. A crooked smile spread across his face. The look he gave me still gives me chills to this day, almost a decade later as an adult. I put my open hand against the door and began to push it open when a pair of arms reached out around me. One hand forcefully pulled the door shut. The other wrapped around the upper part of my chest around my collarbone, pulling me into a tight, unwelcome, and horrible hug. I froze in that moment. What was I supposed to do in this situation? I was always taught to respect adults, and I did. He had a strong scent of alcohol on him, so much that I coughed from the scent. He began to speak after just a moment of holding me there. His words scared me so badly I kind of blocked them out. Now I only remember part of what he said, and I wish I did not. Hey, where you going in such a hurry? He spoke almost passive-aggressively. Oh, I have to go. My mom is waiting for me, I stuttered. Oh, okay. He sounded defeated and began to let me go, but before I could break away, he grabbed me even tighter than before. Wait. I have a dog, you know. He put that stupid grin on his face. Yeah, you should come with me, and you can play with him together, he encouraged. The scary thing is I almost went with him in that moment. The next maybe 8 minutes felt like hours as he let me go and pulled me hard into him, his scruffy beard and soft, dirty coat brushing against my skin. The details make my head hurt to remember. But he kept telling me no, almost ordering me to go with him. Finally, he just seemed to snap altogether. All right, you're coming with me. What? But I need my mom. I have her keys and she's waiting for me. Please let me go. That was still my priority in that moment. Her keys and mail. No, you're not going anywhere but with me now. He opened the door and began to pull me out. In a moment of his weakness though, I managed to break away, running to my mom in her car. I slammed the door shut, scaring my brother and my mother. I began shaking and crying, dropping the mail on the car floor. I shakily picked it up and handed everything to my mom. As she demanded to know what happened, I told her everything, and she immediately looked pissed. I was so glad she was on my side. I looked outside, tears still streaming down my face. I could notice the man staring at me through the car window from the top ramp of the building. I began to cry harder and panic as he started coming over. My mom stopped me as she noticed him approaching. What was her reason for thinking he was completely harmless? He fell down at the bottom of the ramp. He tripped, so he must be harmless. My mom just laughed at that creep and started driving away. She tried to comfort me, saying things like, he was a harmless old drunk man, and at least he didn't hurt you. Now, years later, I brought it up to my dad when I was at his house. My parents divorced 3 years after this. I thought that he knew, but my mom had never told him. He was so furious, but I managed to calm him down. He was pissed my mom didn't come for me sooner, and that she hadn't done more in that moment. I told him not to confront my mom on my behalf, and he agreed. Now, not long after telling my dad, I brought it up to my mom again. My mom said I was being a drama queen. I would never get hurt. The man had never tried anything after all. I was furious, but now I don't even know if I should be. I mean, I know drunk slurring now, but this was almost spiteful, and his tone was so domineering. The questions I'll leave you all with are, what were his intentions? And am I right to be mad at my mom after all these years?